Warning: the following video contains explicit language which may be offensive to some viewers or inappropriate for children. The content within this video is intended for mature audiences only.
Hello and welcome to this video. To start with, I am going to give thanks to all the people that watch these videos, all the people that have subscribed, and all the other Gen X tubers out in the world. Keep doing what you're doing a good job of it. I also like to point out that sunny southeast Texas is still on fire. The latest update that I've seen is saying that there's about 74 active fires in East Texas right now, with a little over 14,600 acres burnt. So yeah, that's kind of where we're standing. At time of filming, the date is Thursday. I gotta check the day. I forgot what day it is. I hate it when that happens. Thursday, September 7th, 2023. This will probably go up next Tuesday, which would be the 12th of September. So things may have changed by the time this airs, but as of September 7th, 2023, we're still on fire over here. So if videos don't get posted or there's a gap, it means that we've had to bug out because of fire danger. So I'm just kind of keeping the fingers crossed on that one. So okay, as for this video, this is just going to be kind of random things that have popped into my head over the last couple days. It's going to kind of be coherent. It's going to kind of lean more into the Gen X tropes, but it is what it is. The first thing I like to talk about is there's a song that came out in my youth by Ozzy Osbourne called Crazy Train. When I was younger, I thought it was like a really cool song. You know, I was into the heavy metal, Metallica, Anthrax, you know, Black Sabbath, Motley Crue, that whole genre of music, along with Beethoven and Mozart and a bunch of the other classics. Brain just got mushy again. I had some me and my good friend Gary had some really interesting mixtapes. In fact, we had a mixtape that I remember fairly fondly that had a mixture of had some Def Leppard, had Mozart's Requiem Mass, Flight of the Valkyries, Master of Puppets by Metallica, and all this. It was just complete crazy mixtape, but it is what it is. Now getting back to the Ozzy Osbourne song Crazy Train. In my late teens, early 20s, I actually sat down and actually paid attention to the lyrics and realized that this song was a Cold War song. The trauma and the PTSD that Cold War people growing up during the Cold War, not Clone War, that's a whole different thing. The Cold War was that I experienced. We didn't use the term PTSD growing up. That's something that happened when I was a young adult. But the whole song, if you go Google the lyrics, just Google the lyrics and read them. And if you're a child of the Cold War, you'll be able to empathize or sympathize with a lot of the lyrics. Growing up right next to Fort Hood, which I know they plan on changing the name. I don't know if they've actually changed it yet. That's something I might want to look up at some point in my life. But the reason why I bring this song up is there's a stanza in it that goes, I've listened to preachers, I've listened to fools, I've watched the dropouts who make their own rules, who make their own rules. And it has occurred to me recently, let me get a drink real quick, that the dropouts who make their own rules could be Gen X, because there was nobody around to tell us you can't do this, you can't do that. We kind of just improvised life. As many different Gen X tubers have pointed out, by the age of 5 or 6, we were using the stove, the oven, taking care of younger siblings, taking care of our schoolwork, and still figuring out how to minimize these other ones so we had the maximum on, fun time. That's what we did. We improvised, adapted, and overcame. I mean, that Marine Corps mantra is basically how we grew up. We made our own rules. We had our own code. I imagine from geographic location to geographic location, those rules changed because they're very situational. We, in Copper's Cove growing up, had the military influence. We had that. We had almost all of our parents were Vietnam vets. And they were damaged. Our government damaged them in Vietnam, physically and mentally. I mean, LBJ, Richard Nixon, done fucked those guys bad. So our parents were doing their thing. As it's been pointed out many times before, we were the first and probably the greatest latchkey generation. Being a latchkey kid, having your key worn around your neck was a thing of honor. Was something that we cherished. Something that it marked you that you were a part of the tribe. You were no longer a little kid. You had your own key. I mean, mind you, this happened right about kindergarten. So we were part of the tribe at an early age. But we did. We made our own rules. We had our own way of doing things. And by the time we were 18, 19, 20 years old, that was our rut. That was how we did things. My first wife, who passed from colon cancer, was a Gen X like me. So we had our, and she grew up in the same tribe around Fort Hood. So it was all pretty interesting. We had the same rules, we had the same thing going on. Then when I remarried my current wife, or not remarried, when I married my current wife, got remarried, her being a millennial had a whole different, my wife was raised by late boomers. So she kind of got a mixture growing up of the Gen X and millennial. She's the eldest child, like I was the eldest child. And we did but because of that time difference, and she grew up partly in Louisiana and partly in Houston. So her whole tribe was separated by geographical location and time. And we had to figure out in our relationship how to make it work. We wanted it to work, so we made it work. And that's what we did. And it wasn't an easy process. It wasn't, okay, to say it was an easy process or not an easy process is kind of too broad in general. There are some things that she assimilated to, things I assimilated to, which was the easy part, but there were places where we bumped heads, just crazy bumped heads, that over time, because we wanted the marriage to work, we made it work. We figured it out. We didn't give up. We made sure that we were able to do what we wanted to do. And it's kind of how we did it. And every now and then we'll bump heads, but we have learned how to minimize the explosion when we do. We have figured out, okay, this is not a fight worth fighting. And we take turns acquiescing to the other one. It's not one-sided. And it boils all back to that one lyric. I watched the dropouts who make their own rules, because we do. Me and my wife make our own rules. Thankfully for society that a lot of our rules run parallel with her rules, but suspender. That whole thing is just crazy. When you can boil that all down to a single line and a single stanza of a single song, it's just what the whole stanza makes me think of us Gen Xers. We were the last generation to grow up with the Cold War. Yes, there were millennials that were born during the Cold War. However, they hadn't come to they weren't aware of the world around them, because a lot of them, like my wife, that were late millennials or late boomers for parents, or early Xers for parents. And it wasn't the late boomers and early Xers did a lot to try to protect their kids from what we had to grow up with. And that's just kind of one of those things, just how it happens. You understand, me growing up, and I've said this in other videos, and other Gen X tubers have said this, that our parents were so busy, so worried about work, putting food on the table, keeping a roof over our heads, keeping us in a house, making sure that, you know, we had the basics, that they had to be reminded every night during the 10 o'clock news that they still had kids. And that's, you know, you can boil this whole thing if you go look at the music of the time. You know, a lot of your songs, yes, and a lot of like Ozzy Osbourne, Bon Jovi, and all of them were millennial, or not millennials, they were boomers. And it wasn't until you start getting into your late 80s, early 90s that you start getting Xers coming up in, you know, the music world, acting, stuff like that. As adults, I imagine if you go back and you really want to check it out, you probably had a whole bunch of Gen X kids that were child actors. But it is what it is. Something else I want to touch on, because I mentioned it earlier. My first wife died because of colon cancer in 2001. And this past year, the end of 2002, matter of fact, the very last day of 2002, I had a friend of mine die from a heart attack, which hurt a lot. And the whole thing is, and it still irritates me to this day. It's been 20 plus years since my wife died. And I try to tell the survivor, another friend of mine, they were both, man and wife, Janet and John, were both good friends of mine. I respect Janet and I respected John. And the thing when someone tells you time will heal all wounds, or just get over it, anyone tells you that, if you lose a loved one, a parent, a spouse, a child, and they tell you that, you should be legally obligated to hit them as hard as you can in their face, just because it doesn't. It doesn't. What all time does is allow you to have scar tissue over top of it that allows you to function. That's all. There's a show on Netflix called The Midnight Gospel, which is based around Duncan Trussell's podcast, the Duncan Trussell Family Hour. Basically what they do is they take excerpts from his podcast and they build an animation around it, and you get these really deep philosophical explorations into life, you know, life, death, afterlife, all this thing, drugs, alcohol, and it's really worth the time to watch. And it's, my wife says it's too death-oriented. It's 8 episodes long, and it is, because one of the things in the Duncan Trussell's life is Buddhism and some aspects of Hinduism. He was a student of Ram Dass, and he is currently a student of David Nichtern. Ram Dass died, and David Nichtern, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, was one of the many college professors in the late 60s, early 70s that went to India and studied a lot of the philosophical and spiritual aspects of Hinduism, Buddhism, and a lot of your other Eastern religions. And from a philosophical point of view, there's a lot of good that can be learned from these religions. In fact, a lot of your mental health stuff, that if you get a mental health practitioner that's not a whore for the pharmaceutical companies. For some reason it didn't sound right the first time I said it, but some of the meditation, mindfulness and stuff is being applied to modern mental health because it works. Mind you, it's a very slow, very long process. It takes doing it again and again and again and building up. One of my favorite things from the Midnight Gospel is the very last episode, in which they use excerpts from the final podcast that Duncan Trussell's mother was on just before she died from breast cancer. And she tells Duncan Trussell that you can't stop heartbreak. And he asks her, then what do you do? And her reply was, you cry. And that is something that touched me. And I watched it in 2020 during the lockdown. I've watched it again and again because that episode, along with the other episodes, but that episode in particular is very relatable to me. There's some other things, and I listen to on Spotify the Duncan Trussell Family Hour. Very good podcast. And Trussell doesn't only have certain people on his podcast. He has a plethora of different viewpoints. Sometimes, a lot of times, probably about 50% of the time, he has people that have viewpoints counter to his. And they rationally and calmly discuss viewpoints, and they work to a middle ground, which is something I think we need to do more of in this day and age. And we need to start working the middle ground, start not being entrenched by one side or the other. We need to come into no man's land and have a truce. Figure out things. Give here, take here, take. It just, that's, society to me has to work like a well-oiled marriage. And it kind of is. Society is kind of a marriage. The individual is part of society. And this is coming from somebody who is a staunch individualist. And it's just one of those things. that yes, as an individual you have certain things, certain obligations, certain beliefs, but you have to work those things to benefit society, because as society benefits, the individual benefits. When the individual benefits, the society benefits. It's a thing of working to the middle, working to a common ground with everybody. Not just people of your tribe. You have to work things out with other tribes, other groups, other peoples. Can't other people, simply because their skin color is the wrong color, simply who they choose to love is different from you, simply because they prefer a different pronoun than you do. They prefer, it's all those things. We have to work together. When you start othering and kicking down, the people that are telling you to kick down are benefiting. You're not. They might make you think you're benefiting, but you're not. And it's just crazy how far in the last 4 to 6 years that we've drifted. We've dug trenches, we've armored up, we got all our weapons ready. It doesn't work. It leads to societal stagnation. And it causes people to do things that not only harm society, that in the long term will harm themselves. And unfortunately, I don't have all the answers. If I did, I would share them with everybody. We have to come together as a species. We can't look at race, we can't look at gender, we can't look at sexual orientation, we cannot look at gender identification. We have to look at, as a species, how we're going to live, get along, and not destroy the planet. I mean, fuck, it's the only one that we got, so it is what it is. I'll get off my soapbox here, go ahead and call this video good, and until next time, peace.
Hey, it's 10 p.m.